In the 1970s, when I started doing Upchurch research in a serious manner, I had to figure out how to organize my records. And of course, at that time, the electronic system was not very well advanced, so I had to create my own system. And in honor of our original immigrant, Michael Upchurch, who came to America in 1638, I called it the Michael Enterprise System. And over time, I'd like to tell you about several components of this system. They included such things as my biofiles, master outlines, census records, organization records, geographic records, and others. But today, let's talk a little bit about the master outlines. These came into existence, and they are essentially the equivalent of what we today would call a family tree. They've been extremely useful. And I'd like to show you some of these and tell you all the elements they contain and how they help us work our way through a particular group of upchurches fitting into the overall upchurch system. In order to do this more effectively, why don't we step over to my bookcase behind my desk where I keep these files and augment them almost every day and have a look at what the whole set of master outlines look like. Well, here we are at the bookshelf behind my desk showing all of the master outlines. Now, they occupy about 3 shelves. Here's 1, 2, and 3. And in these booklets, we have the organized information about the 60,000 upchurches we've identified and how they fit together in the family. Now, we assume people know a little bit about their ancestors in the early years, tracing down to the 5th generation. So we start here with the 5th generation. Now here's Richard Upchurch III, and he's in several booklets. And in fact, if the child of Richard Upchurch III is productive enough to have a lot of children, we have a separate book for him. So here's Richard with his son James VII, Richard with his son Claiborne I, Richard with his son Buckner, and so on. And so here we have the one of the 22 Upchurch clans, Richard Upchurch clan. Here we have his brother Moses Upchurch, which covers several books. Then we have Nathan, and then we have Jubal and Benjamin and Charles. We go on to Abel, another clan head, Harmon Upchurch and several of his children, John Upchurch III. Down here is below is the George Upchurch clan, a very voluminous clan. And so you see in each of these books we have the full story of the outline of the Moses Upchurch clan, Courtney Upchurch subclan. Just to tell you a little more, to make it a little more challenging for us, there are times when we really don't have the linkage of a given person who lived about the time of the Revolution back to Michael Upchurch. I'll give you a couple of examples. Here, for example, is the book on Joseph Upchurch, born about 1776 in North Carolina. His children lived largely in Tennessee. We don't know his father, but we have a great collection of information about his descendants, some 2,000 of them in this book. So we call that the Joseph Upchurch group. Here's another one that's like this. This is the William Upchurch group. He was born in about 1775, and his children lived in Jackson County, Tennessee. So for a great part of our organization, we have good organized books leading back to the Michael Upchurch, but then we have a few where we have to go and say, well, we don't know how they're fit into the group yet, into the family yet, but we've got a booklet on them organizing all of their children. Well, why don't we just take, for example, the Moses Upchurch, Whitney Upchurch subclan and take this book over and sit down and just have a chat about what's in this book and what you could expect to find if you were able to look at this yourself. Well, we've just brought over this booklet on the Moses Whitney Upchurch subclan, but I'd like to make sure that you know how this fits into the family. So we have a chart here, and you can see that we start with Michael Upchurch, the original immigrant to come to America in 1638, and we go down through several generations, and finally in these final blocks we reach the members of the 5th generation, of whom you can see Moses Upchurch has been highlighted. He's one of the 22 heads of clans. And what we're talking about now is this booklet, which has all of the detail about his son Whitney. Let me open the book and make a few comments about how these master outlines unfold. We start with Whitney Upchurch, who is a member of the 6th generation of the family, and we go through his great-grandchildren in the first group, so that covers the 6th through the 9th generations. If we have descendants of the 9th generation, we continue those in a continuation section later on. So you may have to look in different parts of the book to find a given individual. So let's start back at the beginning and see what we can comment on about this organization. First of all, the children of Whitney Upchurch I have in little tabs here, so it's easy for me to refer to them. And I can tell you that these tabs bring to mind right away to me various kinds of situations in Upchurch families which occur time after time. For example, the first thing we see is a daughter born about 1813, whose name we do not know. We don't know what happened to this daughter, what her name was. We know she existed because of certain references in the family. Now, this will come as a shock, but next is a daughter who had an illegitimate child. So that's another facet that we come to. This particular one is of interest to me because of a personal circumstance. I had heard about this individual and her illegitimate child, who was named Merritt Upchurch. And I came to know that there was an older gentleman living in the community who was a grandson of this individual named Pete Upchurch. So in Wake County, North Carolina, years ago, I traveled to the countryside and found Pete Upchurch, and he told me, yes, he was a grandson of Merritt Upchurch, actually Silas Merritt Upchurch, and he remembered going to the funeral for his grandfather. His grandfather had served in the Civil War, and his leg had been injured so that it was stiff. And he told me this story about the fact that they had to break his leg in order to get it in the coffin. Such are the stories you learn as you go around and talk to people about the family. Moving on to some other children, here's one that's of special interest to me, Richard Dillard Upchurch, Sr. Now, most of the children of Whitney Upchurch stayed around central North Carolina. Some of the later generations certainly moved away, but Richard Dillard Upchurch was a very special case because we see him here, and I'll put on my glasses so I can read the details. We see that Richard Dillard Upchurch was born in 1820 in Wake County, North Carolina. But when he was 25 years old, in 1845, we find him marrying Martha Maxey in Shiloh County, Missouri. That's in northern Missouri. I've always wanted to go there and see if I could find his footprints. But we have no idea about why he moved from North Carolina as a 25-year-old man to northern Missouri and married a lady there. He married secondly in another county nearby in Scotland County in 1848. But then in 1862, we find him in California, where in Napa County he married another lady by the name of Mary Mangus. So what do you speculate? He moved from North Carolina to Missouri, and I'll just bet you he moved to California for the gold rush in 1849. More research will probably prove that to be the case or not. So here was an Upchurch who had the wanderlust. He moved from place to place, and you'll see this repeated over and over again in Upchurch families, where one member takes out on his own to go to a foreign land. I could repeat this story many times. I'll tell you another thing about looking at these records. As I do so, memories wash over me about the people I've known, the people I've learned about, the uniquenesses of these individuals. And I'll just bet when you begin to dig into your part of the family, memories will begin to wash over you about what some uncle told you, or what your grandfather told you, or what you even learned about them even after they've passed on. Let's look at a couple of others. Here's James M. Upchurch, another son. The thing I remember about James M., not that I knew him because he was born in 1830, but I knew a descendant of his by the name of Clyde Upchurch, who lived in Mesa, Arizona. Clyde was a Mormon, fairly rare in the Upchurch family, but we did have a number of them. But he obviously was dedicated to documenting his family and worked closely with me and submitted a large number of Upchurch records to the Mormon Church in Salt Lake City. He was a very good collaborator, and I visited in his home and actually spent the night there in Mesa, Arizona in his home. I think Clyde was fairly well off because he had some original Remington sculptures in his home, which I admired very much. But another son I'd like to tell you about is Bennett A. Upchurch, and I'd like to spend a little time on this son of Whitney Upchurch, because Bennett Upchurch has a special story about his descendants. He was a Civil War soldier, and he came home from the war in very poor health. He already had children at home, young children he returned to, but he didn't live long. He died in 1872, and his wife had a second marriage which didn't turn out too well, and his children were sort of pushed out of the home. As a matter of fact, one of his children, Benton Upchurch, I'll have his name here, Thomas Benton Upchurch Sr., left home shortly after his father died, and he wrote a book about his experiences. We have that to go into the Upchurch collection at NC State University, and in it he tells about the harsh times he had, but he and his son moved on to marry some prominent family members in southern Wake County who trace back to Joel Lane, a very prominent early individual. And they moved on to Rayford, North Carolina, and Hope County, where they became extremely prominent individuals in the timber business. I came to know one of the grandsons of Bennett Upchurch. This was Thomas Benton Upchurch Jr. There was a time in North Carolina when he was president of the North Carolina Cotton Growers Association, and I had a brief discussion with him. But I've come to know other later descendants of the family, and as a matter of fact, I have been to Hope County, North Carolina, to give an Upchurch lecture. There are a great many stories that could be told about this family. I have direct contacts with a number of these individuals, and they've been very helpful. Let me tell you a little bit about how this information flows onto these pages. It mostly happens because of collaboration with other people. Someone will find me, and it may turn out that they are a descendant of Whitney Upchurch, and I go to the book where they're located, and either I find them or their ancestor, and this starts a series of exchanges. And often I will make copies of certain of the pages in this book and send it to them, and they will find it to be extremely useful and will send back information to me. And we continue to go back and forth to share more and more information. The more people share with me, the more I share with them, and that's the way it works. Now, this information is also to be found in other places. For example, every individual in this book has been assigned an XID number, and those XID numbers are in the Upchurch Bulletin, some 60,000 of them. And we now have digitized the Upchurch Bulletin, both the narrative part and the part of the registry which contains the XID numbers, and you can go there and search to find your particular family member, your ancestor, or even yourself perhaps, and their XID numbers. Now this booklet does contain more information than is in the Upchurch Bulletin, because here we add additional information such as when they were married, where they were married, where they died, where they were buried, and similar information. These books, of course, will all go to North Carolina State University and be a part of the Upchurch collection there. But in the meantime, I continue to share segments of these with people who are interested collaborators, and some of you may wish to contact me about collaboration and about knowing about your part of the family. We hope to do more work in digitizing these later on, but that's a subject for another discussion. There is another layer of information about these individuals. For example, there's even more on a given individual than appears in this book, and in that case, we find that information in our biofile system. And we may have, for a given individual, not just the 2 or 3 lines you see here in this book, but we may have 10 or 12 or 15 pages. We may have the will of the individual, we may have copies of deeds, we may have stories that people sent to me, we may have newspaper clipping in those biofiles. That will be a subject for discussion at another time, because the biofiles were another component of the Michael Upchurch's system. It's a pleasure to bring you this information about how we created these records over the years, and I hope we'll be able to interact with some of you some more about these. Thank you for listening.